It looked routine, a simple form, a number circled in blue, nothing dramatic, just exact. That's when I knew something was wrong. Families make emotional mistakes. Systems don't. Precision belongs to systems. And when a system starts using your name, your signature, your silence, the numbers usually uncover the truth long before anyone is willing to admit it. People assume my family business ran on hard work and shared risk. Small warehouses, storage units, modest properties that looked boring from the outside and complicated on paper. What they didn't see was how everything actually moved. My parents liked to say we were asset people. They didn't talk about feelings. They talked about square footage, cash flow, timing, and in that language, I was useful. I wasn't paying rent. I wasn't covering groceries. I was trusted. That was the word they used. If a document needed reviewing, it came to me. If a contract needed a second set of eyes, it landed on my desk. If a form needed a signature just to keep things moving, it slid across the table in my direction. No pressure, no raised voices, just an assumption that I would handle it. Clara's good with details. Clara keeps things organized. Clara won't miss anything important. I didn't argue with that. I had built my life on being reliable. My brother Evan had a different role. He was the idea guy, the one with vision, the one my parents said just needed time. They never used the word golden. They didn't have to. Every delay had an explanation. Every mistake had a reason. Every setback was framed as preparation for something bigger. When deals stalled, it wasn't Evan's fault. When numbers didn't add up, it was the market. When money disappeared, it was temporary. Someone just needed to stabilize things until he found his footing. That someone was always me. Golden children aren't born, they're trained. They grow up in a world where consequences are softened before they land, where accountability is postponed, where belief replaces evidence, and belief is expensive. My parents invested in that belief the way other people invest in stocks. They doubled down when it didn't perform. They held when it dipped. They refused to sell, because admitting the loss would mean admitting they were wrong. I didn't notice the pattern at first. Patterns feel normal when you grow up inside them. Paperwork became routine, folders stacked up, deadlines blurred. I was asked to take a look more often, to just sign this so we don't lose momentum, to help us keep things clean. Clean was their favorite word. Nothing felt like exploitation. It felt like responsibility. There were no threats, no ultimatums, no emotional scenes. That's the part people don't understand. Abuse doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it looks efficient. Everything was framed as trust. And trust is a powerful thing to weaponize. If you hesitate, you feel disloyal. If you ask questions, you feel difficult. If you say no, you feel like you're breaking something fragile. So you don't. You sign, you review, you file. You tell yourself you're being helpful. You tell yourself this is temporary. You tell yourself that families work this way. Meanwhile, Evan drifted. New plans, new partnerships, new almost deals that never quite closed. Each one needed support. Each one needed patience. Each one needed someone steady behind the scenes. I became the quiet fix, not the face, not the risk taker, the buffer. If something went wrong, it didn't explode. It leaked, and I absorbed it. My parents never asked if I was comfortable. They asked if I had time. There's a difference. Time can be taken. Comfort requires consent. At night, I'd organize folders long after the warehouse lights went out. I'd reread contracts I didn't remember agreeing to review. I'd catch my own name in places it didn't feel like it should be, but nothing was obviously wrong. Not yet. That's how systems like this survive. They don't cross lines, they blur them. One small favor at a time. If you're watching this and thinking, nothing here sounds that bad, that's the point. By the time something feels bad, the structure is already in place. Golden children are protected by narratives. Caretakers are buried under logistics. And the most dangerous position in a system like this isn't the rebel. It's the dependable one. The person everyone trusts. The person who keeps things running. The person whose name ends up everywhere because no one thinks to question it. At least, not yet. Because once you start looking closely, once you stop assuming good intentions and start following patterns, you realize something unsettling. You were never just helping. You were holding the weight. At first, I thought my silence was keeping the peace. When I didn't push back, things moved faster. When I didn't ask questions, meetings ended sooner. When I nodded and said, "I'll take care of it," the tension in the room disappeared. That felt like harmony. But after a while, I noticed something else. The smoother things ran, the heavier everything felt on my end. Paperwork started to repeat itself, the same forms, the same clauses, the same deadlines, just under different names. I began recognizing documents before they were explained to me. That should have felt efficient. Instead, it felt familiar in the wrong way. I was tired more often, not physically, mentally. I'd sit at my desk late at night, scrolling through folders I didn't remember creating, catching my own signature where I didn't remember placing it. Not forged. Not yet. Just frequent. That's when it clicked. Every time I stayed quiet, the system adjusted around me, not to protect me, to rely on me. My silence wasn't neutral. It was functional. I stopped interrupting conversations. I stopped correcting assumptions. I stopped volunteering explanations. Instead, I started watching. I noticed how quickly problems were routed in my direction, how decisions were framed as already made by the time they reached me, how often my name appeared at the bottom of documents that were supposedly shared responsibilities. I didn't argue. I didn't confront anyone. I opened a notebook. Nothing dramatic, just dates, file names. Who handed me what? Who said, "We'll talk about this later"? Later never came. The notes did. I realized something uncomfortable. The family didn't run on authority. It ran on avoidance. No one wanted to slow things down by asking hard questions. No one wanted to be the bad guy. So everything flowed toward the person least likely to resist. Me. That's when silence stopped being automatic. I wasn't quiet because I was afraid. I was quiet because I was collecting evidence. There's a difference between being passive and being deliberate. I crossed that line without telling anyone. I let conversations finish. I let assumptions stand. I let people speak as if I wasn't paying attention. And then I wrote it all down. Every just for now. Every temporary fix. Every "we'll clean this up later." Silence gave me clarity. I could see the pattern clearly once I stopped reacting to it. Evan talked about growth. My parents talked about stability. And I handled the consequences. Whenever something went wrong, no one panicked. They deferred. Clara will know what to do. Clara can explain it. Let Clara take a look. It sounded like respect. It functioned like dependence. That's how power hides. Not in control, in convenience. The more reliable I was, the less visible my boundaries became. I noticed how decisions were made without me, but finalized through me. How risks were taken by others, but absorbed by my name. How silence from me was interpreted as consent. I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. If I stopped talking entirely, would anything change? The answer was no. Things would keep moving, just more quietly. That's when I understood the real role I was playing. I wasn't part of the discussion. I was the infrastructure, and infrastructure isn't consulted. It's used. Once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. I started comparing notes with documents, comparing timelines with explanations, comparing what I was told with what was filed. Small inconsistencies showed up first. A date shifted, a responsibility blurred, a signature duplicated. Nothing illegal on its own, nothing loud enough to confront, but together, they told a story. Silence gave me leverage I didn't know I had. Because when you stop defending yourself, people stop hiding from you. They assume you're still compliant. They assume you're still unaware. They assume you're still alone in your head. I was alone, but not confused. I stopped trying to be understood. I focused on understanding. And once you understand the structure, emotion loses its grip. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was alert. Every system reveals itself when you stop feeding it noise. That's the quiet no one warns you about. The quiet that doesn't numb you. The quiet that sharpens everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't set boundaries out loud. I let the system speak in its own language. Paper, patterns, consequences. And the more I listened, the clearer it became. This wasn't about family anymore. It was about function. And I was no longer just inside it. I was documenting it. The question wasn't whether something was wrong. The question was how long it had been wrong, and how much of it had been built on my silence. At some point, the story stopped feeling like a family issue. Families argue. They miscommunicate. They make emotional decisions and regret them later. What I was looking at didn't behave like that. It behaved like a system. I started laying everything out side by side. Not to accuse anyone, not to confront anyone, just to see it clearly. At first, my signature appeared once, then again, in a different folder, under a different project name. That still could have been coincidence. But coincidences don't reference each other. I noticed how newer documents pointed backward, how this was approved previously, how this followed the same structure as an earlier agreement. Earlier agreements I had signed. That was the moment the air in the room changed. I wasn't just showing up in the paperwork. My name was holding it together. I pulled files from different months, different properties, different supposed purposes. They all shared the same backbone. My signature didn't close the deal. It legitimized it. I sat alone at the folding table in the garage office. The hum of the lights overhead, stacks of paper spread out in front of me, page after page, date after date. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal on its own. That's how these things survive. Each document looked harmless, reasonable, temporary, but together, they formed something solid. I checked the order of operations. What came first? What depended on what? And that's when it became undeniable. Later transactions didn't exist without earlier ones, and those earlier ones didn't exist without me. My name created continuity. Continuity created credibility. Credibility unlocked access. This wasn't emotional reliance. It was structural dependence. I wasn't being asked for help anymore. I was being used as a reference point. I went back through old emails. Not the emotional ones, the logistical ones. Just attaching this for your records. Looping you in for visibility. Using the same setup as last time. Last time. That phrase kept appearing. No one ever asked if last time should exist. They just assumed it should. I realized something quietly unsettling. The system didn't need my active participation anymore. It needed my history. Every previous yes lowered resistance. Every quiet approval reduced friction. Every moment I didn't push back trained the process to move faster. I wasn't consulted, I was referenced. That's when I stopped thinking in terms of trust. Trust implies intention. This didn't require any. The system didn't need to deceive me. It only needed me to remain predictable. I checked how often my name appeared compared to everyone else's. How often I was listed as reviewer, guarantor, point of contact. The imbalance was obvious once I stopped normalizing it. If something failed, my name would be the first stable point to grab. If something succeeded, my role would disappear into the background. That's not how families operate. That's how risk management works. I caught myself rereading one document 3 times, trying to figure out why it made my chest feel tight. Then I saw it. A clause referencing an earlier agreement. An agreement I hadn't thought about in months. An agreement I'd signed because it felt easier than explaining why I was uncomfortable. That one signature had become a cornerstone, and cornerstones don't move. I wasn't supporting the structure, I was part of its foundation. I asked myself a hard question. If everything collapsed tomorrow, where would responsibility land? Not emotionally, legally. The answer didn't take long. It would land where continuity lived. With me. I wasn't angry when I realized this. Anger would have been simpler. I felt exposed, like I had been standing in the wrong place the entire time, holding weight I didn't know I was holding. I stopped asking why no one warned me. Warnings assume awareness. This system didn't require anyone to fully see it. It functioned through habit, through repetition, through the quiet assumption that I would keep doing what I'd always done. I thought about how often I'd been described as steady, how often people said I made things feel safe, safe for whom safety is relative. I imagined removing my name from the equation, not dramatically, not with confrontation, just absent. The structure didn't fall apart in my mind. It sagged, slowly, inevitably. And it sagged toward the only solid anchor it had left. Me. That's when the story fully changed. This wasn't about loyalty. It wasn't about family dynamics or unresolved feelings. It was about a system that had learned how to run on my reliability. And systems don't stop because you're tired. They stop when the fuel runs out. I looked back at the pages one more time, then closed the folder. Not because I had a plan, not because I knew what to do next, but because I finally understood where I was standing. I wasn't on the inside anymore. I was looking at the whole thing from the outside, seeing how value flowed, how risk accumulated, how accountability quietly vanished. And right at the center of that flow was a single name that appeared too consistently to be accidental. Mine. That was the moment it stopped being about what they had done. It became about what I had enabled. Not intentionally, not maliciously, systematically. And systems don't respond to feelings. They respond to disruption. I didn't know yet what disruption would look like, but I knew one thing for certain. If I moved, the entire structure would have to adjust, because it had been built on me for far longer than I realized. The question was no longer whether the system needed fuel. The question was how long it had been consuming mine, and what would happen when I finally stopped supplying it. There was a point where I stopped asking whether they meant well. That question kept me stuck for a long time, because when you focus on intent, you stop looking at impact. And impact is quieter, but heavier. I sat with the folders open in front of me, the notebook beside them. My laptop still warm. Nothing was moving. No one was arguing. No one was asking me for anything. That silence made something obvious. I wasn't being pressured. I was being assumed. Helping had slowly turned into default behavior, not because I offered more, but because no one expected me to stop. Every request was framed as reasonable, temporary, necessary, just this once, just until things stabilize, just to keep the family protected. I noticed how often the word family showed up right before something uncomfortable, not after, before, as a buffer. If you're watching this and you've ever heard, "We're family, so it's different," you know exactly what I mean. Different from what? From accountability, from consequences. I realized that helping, in this context, didn't have an endpoint. There was no moment where someone said, "You've done enough." There was no threshold where support turned back into independence. The line kept moving, and I kept stepping forward. I asked myself a question I had avoided because it felt disloyal. If I wasn't related to them, would this still be expected of me? The answer came faster than I wanted. No, that didn't make them villains. It didn't make me a victim. It made the situation clearer. I wasn't helping because they needed help. I was helping because the system needed someone to absorb risk quietly. And I was good at that. There's a difference between generosity and sacrifice. Generosity is chosen. Sacrifice is assumed. At some point, no one checked whether I could afford to say yes. They only checked whether I did. I remembered how often my own plans had been postponed. How often I told myself I'd deal with my life after this settles. How often after this never arrived. I wasn't angry when I saw that pattern. I felt tired, not exhausted, resolved. Helping should feel mutual, even when it's uneven. What I was doing felt one-directional. If I hesitated, the tone shifted, not to anger, to disappointment. And disappointment is powerful. It makes you question your values, your loyalty, your worth. No one yelled. No one threatened. They didn't have to. They trusted that I would keep showing up, because I always had. I looked at the evidence again, not the legal kind, the emotional kind. How often had anyone asked what this was costing me? How often had someone said, "You don't have to do this"? I couldn't remember a single time. That was the moment I understood something important. Love doesn't require silence. It doesn't require you to disappear to function. If the relationship collapses the moment you stop carrying weight, then the relationship was balanced on you alone. That doesn't mean the people involved are evil. It means the structure is unsustainable. I stopped framing my role as support. Support implies choice. What I was doing had become obligation, and obligation, when it's unspoken, is dangerous. I thought about what would happen if I said no, not dramatically, not permanently, just once. Would anyone ask why, or would they tell me why I shouldn't? That answer mattered more than I expected. Helping turns into sacrifice when your refusal causes emotional fallout, when boundaries are treated like betrayal, when rest is interpreted as selfishness. I wasn't trying to punish anyone by pulling back. I was trying to understand where I ended. I realized I had never clearly existed as a separate person in this system. I existed as a function, reliable, available, replaceable only in theory. That's not love. That's convenience. I didn't confront anyone with this realization. I didn't announce it. I just stopped justifying myself internally. That was the shift. I stopped asking for permission to feel uneasy. I stopped explaining why I needed space. I let the discomfort sit. Helping doesn't feel like love when it erases you. It feels like maintenance. And maintenance is endless unless something breaks. I wasn't ready to break anything yet, but I was done pretending that this was simply kindness. Kindness doesn't trap you. It doesn't leave you alone with consequences you didn't agree to. If you're watching this and you're stuck in that same question, am I helping Or am I being sacrificed? Here's the quiet test. What happens when you pause? Not forever, just long enough to breathe. If the reaction is understanding, it's help. If the reaction is guilt, pressure, or urgency, it's something else. I didn't change my behavior immediately. I changed my awareness. And once you see the line clearly, you can't unknow it. That was the moment the story stopped being about what I owed. It became about what I was willing to lose. Because love that costs you your agency isn't love, it's leverage. And I had been holding that leverage against myself for far too long. The question wasn't whether I cared about my family. I did. The question was whether caring required me to disappear. And for the first time, the answer was no. That realization didn't solve everything, but it changed the direction of the story. Because once helping stops feeling like love, you either keep sacrificing or you redefine the boundary. I knew which one I couldn't survive anymore. By the time I was ready to speak, I didn't need to raise my voice. I needed a table, not the dining table, not the one where family conversations happened and feelings were used as currency. I needed a work table, a place where words meant less than paper. The meeting didn't start with a fight. It started with logistics. My father texted me that morning and said we needed to touch base about the next property. My mother added, "Bring your laptop." No reason, no context. Just that same tone that made everything sound normal. If you've lived in a system like this, you know the tone. It makes unreasonable things feel routine. I drove to the warehouse in the early afternoon. The sun was sharp. The air smelled like dust and warm metal. Inside, it was quiet in the way workspaces get quiet when something is about to happen. Evan was already there. He was leaning against a desk like he owned the building, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, relaxed, untouchable. My mother stood by a shelf of binders, perfect posture, calm face. My father hovered near the doorway, like he was ready to exit if the temperature changed. I didn't sit down right away. I set my laptop on the table, then I placed the folder beside it. A thick folder, not dramatic, just heavy. My mother glanced at it, then back at me. "What's that?" she asked. "Documentation," I said. That was the first time the room shifted. Not because of fear, because of uncertainty. Systems depend on certainty. My father cleared his throat and started talking about timelines, about interest rates, about how we needed to move fast because opportunities don't wait. Evan nodded along like it was a podcast he'd heard before. I let him finish. Then I opened my laptop. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't say the words I had been swallowing for months. I just pulled up a timeline, a simple spreadsheet, dates, file numbers, signatures, references. My mother leaned closer without thinking. That's what paper does. It pulls people in. It bypasses emotion. I clicked to the first file, the earliest one I could trace, the one I remembered signing because I was tired and it felt easier than asking for a meeting. I didn't call it a mistake. I called it what it was. A starting point. I said. Then I clicked to the next one. Same structure, different project name. A clause referencing the prior approval. Prior approval meaning my signature. Evan frowned. "Why are you bringing this up now?" he asked. I looked at him for a second. Not with anger, with patience, because it's connected, I said. Then I clicked again, and again. Each new file didn't stand on its own. It leaned on the last one, and every time, my name was the bridge. My father's face changed slowly. Not guilt, not shock. Calculation. He started scanning the screen like he was trying to locate the soft spot in the argument. My mother stayed calm. She always did. Clara, she said, in that careful voice, you're making this sound more serious than it is. That line used to work on me. It used to lower my pulse, make me doubt my clarity, but I wasn't running on emotion anymore. I was running on evidence. I slid the folder across the table. It made a quiet sound when it landed, not a slam, a placement. My mother opened it and flipped through the pages. Her fingers moved fast at first, then slower. My father leaned in. Evan stayed back, like distance could protect him. I watched their eyes do what people's eyes always do when they meet reality. They stop performing. My mother's voice stayed level. This is just paperwork, she said. I nodded once. Yes, I said. It is. Then I pointed to one page in the folder. A signature, not mine, but close enough to pretend. A copy of my name, flattened and mechanical, like someone had traced it instead of signing it. My father went still. Evan laughed under his breath. A small laugh, the kind people do when they're trying to turn discomfort into a joke. Come on, he said. No one forged anything. I didn't argue. I clicked into a file on my laptop and turned the screen slightly so he could see. A comparison, not a rant. Not a speech. 2 signatures side by side. One mine, one not mine. And the dates. The dates were the part no one could explain away. Because you can argue about feelings. You can rewrite conversations. You can't rewrite timestamps. My mother looked up at me, and for the first time, her face didn't have a script. What do you want? She asked. That was the moment I knew I had them. Not because I wanted anything from them, but because the question revealed the truth. They thought this was a negotiation. They thought I was finally asking for my portion, my recognition, my gratitude. They still didn't understand. I don't want anything, I said. My father blinked like he didn't hear me correctly. Evan scoffed. My mother tightened her jaw. I kept my voice steady. I want my name out of this, I said. Completely. My mother's face softened in a way that used to make me fold. Clara, she said, we're family. There it was. The emergency exit. The phrase that was supposed to dissolve consequences. I didn't react. I just nodded once, like I was acknowledging a fact. Yes, I said. That's why this matters. My father stepped forward, palms out. Let's not make this into a big thing, he said. That was another line that used to work. It worked when I was trying to preserve harmony, but harmony had been a cover for imbalance. This is already a big thing, I said. Then I opened a second envelope. This one was thinner. Printed emails, a timeline summary, a list of file references. Not a threat, a record. I placed it on the table beside the folder. 2 objects, 2 anchors. My mother stared at them like they were foreign. Evan's confidence drained in increments. He tried to speak, then stopped. He looked at my father, waiting for rescue. My father didn't rescue him. My father did what he always did when reality got expensive. He tried to shift the cost. We can fix this, he said, quietly. We'll handle it. Handle it meant bury it. Handle it meant I would still be attached to it, just more quietly. I shook my head. No, I said. You can handle your part. I'm handling mine. My mother's voice sharpened for the first time. You would do this to your own family, she asked. I looked at her. That question used to stab. Now it just sounded like strategy. I didn't do this, I said. I documented it. Silence filled the room. The warehouse felt larger in it. Evan stared at the floor. My father stared at the folder. My mother stared at me. like she was trying to find the version of me that would flinch. I didn't flinch, because this wasn't about love anymore. This was about consequences. And consequences don't care who raised you. They only care whose name is on the paper. I closed my laptop, not because the conversation was over, because the point had been made. I stood up and picked up my keys. My mother opened her mouth, then stopped. My father looked like he wanted to say something wise, something final. He didn't. I walked to the door and paused for 1 second, not to threaten them, to ask a question that felt almost gentle. If this was really just family help. I said, why did it need my signature in the first place? Then I left. And for the first time, the room behind me didn't feel like my responsibility. I expected to feel victorious after I walked out of that warehouse. I didn't. I felt quiet, not empty, just quiet, like my nervous system didn't know what to do without the constant pressure. I drove home with both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, and that folder on the passenger seat like it belonged there. The sun was starting to set. The streets were normal. People were still living their ordinary lives. That was the strangest part. My world had shifted, but the world didn't pause. When I got back, I didn't run inside to cry. I didn't call a friend to vent. I didn't replay the conversation out loud like I needed to convince myself it happened. I locked my car. I carried the folder in. I set it on my desk. Then I did something small. I ate. I hadn't eaten all day. That was my body's way of reminding me that survival is practical before it is emotional. I opened my laptop and started working through what came next. Not revenge, not punishment, cleanup. That's what it felt like I was cleaning a spill that had been ignored for too long. I didn't need to destroy anyone. I needed my name separated from the mess. The first thing I did was pull my credit reports again. I had already looked at them, but after that meeting, I looked differently. I wasn't searching for surprises anymore. I was confirming patterns. The second thing I did was gather copies of everything I had, not just the suspicious documents. Everything. Because systems don't collapse from one lie. They collapse from a record. I opened a new folder on my computer. A simple label, no drama, evidence, then another folder, timeline, then another, correspondence. I didn't feel powerful while I did it. I felt steady. That's a different kind of strength. People think justice looks like shouting, like exposure, like someone finally getting humiliated the way they humiliated you. But justice doesn't require your anger. Justice requires your clarity. Anger burns fast. Clarity lasts. I didn't want to be controlled by my emotions anymore, not by guilt, not by rage, not even by the need for them to understand. That was the hardest part. Because a part of me still wanted my mother to look at me and say, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this. I wanted my father to admit he knew. I wanted Evan to face the weight of what he had benefited from. But wanting that kept me tied to them. It kept me waiting. And I was done waiting. I sent a short email to our family attorney. Not emotional. Not accusatory. A request for copies of specific files and confirmations of my involvement. It was polite, precise. It made my stomach turn when I hit send. Not because it was wrong, but because I knew it crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. That night, my mother called. I let it ring. Then she texted, "We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, because I knew what she wanted. She wanted my feelings, my reaction, my fear. She wanted the version of me that still lived inside family language. I didn't respond right away. I made tea. I sat down. I looked at the folder again. Then I texted back one sentence. Email is fine. That message was my first real boundary. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was simply refusing to play on her preferred field. She didn't reply. My father called later. I let it ring too. Then I got a voicemail. Soft voice. Calm tone. Let's handle this internally. Internally meant quietly, privately, without a record. Internally meant the system staying intact. I deleted the voicemail, not out of spite, out of choice. For the first time, I chose not to carry their discomfort. I slept that night, but it wasn't good sleep. I woke up at 3:00 a.m. and checked my email like I was waiting for a fire alarm. There was nothing. My body was still in the old rhythm, but my mind had crossed a line. The next day, I started the process of separating my finances from anything connected to the family business. I changed passwords, updated account access, turned on alerts I should have turned on years earlier. It felt mundane. And that was healing in its own way. Because the opposite of chaos isn't drama, it's structure. A week later, a packet arrived in the mail, copies of documents I had requested, stamped, dated. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't closure. It was confirmation. I spread the papers out on my desk and compared them to what I already had. The same references, the same timeline links, the same pattern. This wasn't in my head. That mattered more than I expected. When you've been gaslit long enough, the deepest relief isn't winning. It's reality. I didn't feel the urge to scream. I didn't feel the need to announce anything to the world. I felt something simpler. I felt free from needing to prove it. That's what people don't tell you about justice. Sometimes the greatest victory is not getting revenge. It's getting your life back. My mother tried again after that. A long message, a lot of words, family, loyalty, sacrifice. Everything I had heard before. I read it once. Then I put my phone down. I didn't respond, because not every message deserves your energy, and not every relationship deserves your access. I kept moving forward, one document, one confirmation, one boundary at a time. No explosions, just consequences. And slowly, the weight shifted. Not all at once, not in a cinematic moment, but in small, irreversible steps. That's the thing about real power. It doesn't look loud. It looks consistent. It looks like someone who no longer needs to explain their boundaries. It looks like someone who understands that justice isn't a feeling, it's a structure. And once the structure is in place, you don't need to be angry anymore. You just need to be done. If you've ever been in a situation where you thought, I'm only staying calm because I'm scared, I want you to consider a different possibility. Maybe you're staying calm because you're finally choosing yourself. Maybe you're not weak. Maybe you're collecting the pieces you need to leave cleanly, because leaving with clarity is its own kind of victory. And it lasts longer than rage ever will. If you're still here, I want to stop telling my story for a moment. I want to talk to you. Because there's a version of this situation that doesn't look dramatic at all. It looks ordinary. It looks like a kitchen table, a stack of papers, someone saying, it's just a formality. Maybe it's a loan. Maybe it's a lease. Maybe it's a line of credit. Maybe they say your name is only there to help, just in case, only temporarily. And maybe nothing about the moment feels dangerous. No yelling, no threats, no pressure you can point to. Just familiarity, just trust. Just the quiet assumption that you'll say yes, because you always have. If you've ever been asked to co-sign something for family, you know exactly what that moment feels like. Your stomach tightens, but you smile anyway. Your mind hesitates, but your mouth says, let me take a look. And the look they give you is subtle, not gratitude, expectation. That's the part people don't talk about. You're not being asked because you're careless. You're being asked because you're responsible, because your credit is clean, your job is stable, your history is solid. You're the safe option, and safety gets exploited quietly. If you're in that moment right now, I want you to pause, not forever, just long enough to ask one question. If this goes wrong, who carries the consequences? Not who feels bad, not who apologizes, who pays, who gets the calls, whose credit takes the hit, whose future gets delayed. If the answer is you, then this isn't help. It's risk transfer. And risk transfer dressed up as love is still risk transfer. I know what you're thinking. You don't want to be selfish. You don't want to break the family dynamic. You don't want to be the reason things fall apart. But listen carefully. Systems don't fall apart because one person says no. They fall apart because they were already unstable. If the only thing holding something together is your signature, your silence, or your sacrifice, then the system is already broken. And it's being propped up by you. People will tell you that saying no will cause damage. What they don't say is that saying yes might cause permanent damage to you. There is a difference between support and liability. Support is voluntary, transparent, time-bound. Liability is vague, open-ended, and always minimized in conversation. If someone can't clearly explain what you're signing, how long it lasts, and what happens if things fail, that's not trust. That's avoidance. And avoidance always has consequences, just not immediately. If you're watching this and thinking, but they need me, I understand. I told myself that too. But need is not the same as entitlement. And love is not proven by how much risk you absorb. Love doesn't require you to put your name on something you don't control. Love doesn't ask you to carry consequences alone. If you're afraid that saying no will make you the villain, ask yourself this. Why does your boundary threaten them? Why does your caution feel like betrayal? Why does your hesitation cause panic? Healthy systems survive questions. Only fragile ones collapse under scrutiny. I'm not telling you to cut anyone off. I'm not telling you to escalate. I'm telling you to slow down, to read everything, to ask for copies, to consult someone who isn't emotionally involved. And if that makes the room uncomfortable, that discomfort is information, because the right thing doesn't require urgency. Urgency is often how consent gets bypassed. If you take nothing else from this story, take this. You don't owe anyone your future just because they share your last name. You don't owe silence to keep the peace. And you don't owe access to your life just because you've been reliable before. Reliability is not an obligation, it's a choice. And you are allowed to choose yourself. If this resonates, if you're in that moment right now, you're not alone. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you want more stories like this, stories about boundaries, systems, and choosing clarity over guilt like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe. Sometimes the most important decision isn't what you sign, it's what you refuse to sign your name to.